Good afternoon and welcome to the podcast. I'm Zach Newman. I'm here with my friends Tanner Seacrest,
Hello.
Daniel Queering,
How's it going?
and today joining us, Austin Calum.
Oh, hi there.
Tell us who you are, Austin.
I'm Austin Calum. I am a DP, or want to be DP. Been shooting some stuff with Zach.
You're our DP.
I'm Zach's DP.
He's the guy who shot and edited The Running Joke.
I make Zach's words into images. So
Yeah, that's a way you could say that.
that's how I said it.
He'll be a recurring guest, so he doesn't quite get the guest star status that will afford our other guests. But I'm sure it's fine.
It's fine.
All right. What have you guys been up to of the late? Tanner, what have you been up to?
Well, I just finished my last semester as a student, kind of. Passed all my classes, so
That's good news.
that is very good news.
Hooray.
And
Welcome to the club.
yeah, so I've been on Christmas break for a little bit. So
Nice.
that's what I've been up to.
How about you, Dan?
Well, this week I went to a pretty swell Christmas party over at apartment 905.
That's my apartment.
Now, I'm not going to say any more details in case there's any of you crazies out there that are going to come and hunt down Zach.
They're going to be knocking down all the apartment 905.
Yeah. Every apartment 905 in Kansas. But the interesting thing that happened was when I got home that night, and I live about an hour and a half away.
Well, I think you need a... Oh, wait. No, continue.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, there's a little prequel to that where you had your truck issues.
Oh, yeah. So the reason why I had issues with my truck, so I left it in Hillsboro. So I went to pick up my truck, and I was already halfway to the party, so I was like, I might as well go the whole way, right? And so go to the party, have a great old time, ate some pizza, and then I went home, and then at about 3 a.m, my smoke alarms woke me up. And at first I was just kind of checking them out, and I was like, well, what's going on here? And then I hear my other smoke alarm in my house go off. And so I go to investigate, and I turn on the lights, and I see, like, smoke, like, hazing around the lights in my ceiling.
That's never a good sign.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, well, that means there's a fire somewhere, but I don't know where. And so I go into my bathroom, and my water heater was on fire.
Nice.
And I put it out with a towel. And then once it was out, I then called the fire department, and they came and looked around and sucked all of the smoke out of my apartment with a big fan.
I'm glad that you added with the big fan
With a big
because
fan, yeah.
Not like with hoses attached
or
to
like
their mouth.
or just
Oh yeah,
straws.
they just came in with straws. Yeah, they all talked like this, like cigarettes.
like on Arrested Development where she spits the smoke out into Buster's mouth and he runs outside and blows outside. That's kind of
it was similar to that, except not at all.
Oh,
and
okay.
So by 4:30 I was back to bed, and then I went to school and taught some classes, and yeah. So that was a great start to my morning.
I have actually a somewhat related story, but I'll get to that.
Okay.
Austin, what have you been doing? I feel like I just
Are
want to
you
save
saving
mine
yours for the grand
last.
for the grand finale? Okay.
We understand. Lately, finished school as well for at least the first semester of this year. I also attend the same college that Tanner goes to, and the rest of us have gone to in the past. But recently, I've actually been visiting the art museum in Wichita a couple of different times. They've got this Irving Penn exhibit there that's quite interesting. He's a fine arts photographer. He had done some photography for a fashion magazine in New York for, I believe, over 40 years. And so they had some of his stuff on display. Oddly enough, most of it wasn't actually fashion. A lot of his earlier work, including some of the street photography he did. But yeah, that was pretty interesting, kind of nice and relaxing, different kind of pace, and a nice break from school life for sure.
Man, the intellectual tier of this conversation just skyrocketed.
It's about to go back.
Yeah, it's gonna go way down.
All right, so I have less of like one story and more about, let me tell you about my day yesterday. So yesterday, did a few things yesterday, and then I like got back home in the afternoon. I was like, all right, I'm gonna take a shower. So I like to shower in the afternoon because I can't get up in the morning. So I take a shower, and I'm in the shower, and I'm like, I think I'm gonna take a nap after this shower. But before I got out of the shower, my smoke alarm started to go off.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, having been conditioned by fire alarm tests my whole life, I said to myself, this is not a real fire. Finished showering, took some time drying off, getting dressed, and there was no fire.
Oh, okay.
And so I looked everywhere, there was no fire. And so I go and I try to take the batteries out of the smoke alarms. Didn't matter. They were still going off. I don't even know why they have those batteries. But so this is the loudest sound I've ever heard. Okay, like I saw the movie Dunkirk. I've been to Arrowhead Stadium. This was the loudest. And so I'm like, I can't stay here. And so first of all, I go outside and I call the emergency maintenance hotline. And for those of you who are not in the room, I did air quotes around emergency because they don't come quickly. So then I'm like, all right, I can't eat inside my house because I'll die. So I go to Sonic, get some Sonic, go back. They're still going off. So at that point, I was going to go to my friend Chris's house because we were going to see a movie last night. And I was like, I'm going now. I don't need to leave for another 90 minutes, but I'm going now. So I leave. So that was the first thing that happened. It was very annoying and very loud. And so, a little backstory with my friend Chris. By no fault of his own, or maybe, you know, he's just a sabotage artist, my car always breaks around him. Last year, when I lived with him during the summer, my car broke, and there were multiple fiascos trying to fix it. It was out of commission for a full month.
One of them involved towing it with
a minivan down the streets of Hillsborough. Maybe I'll get to tell the full story sometime. When I was moving to Wichita, I was moving some stuff to his house, lost my power steering 2 blocks from his house. Same car, the day after I had been at his house, that car died. Never started again. Had to get a new car. So that's just a few of the things that have happened around Chris. So today, I go to his house, we all ride to the movie together, we come back, and we hang out. And so it's like 2 a.m. And I go back out to my car. The window has been smashed.
Like someone did it.
Like someone did it.
Oh, man.
Or it was like an errant hailstone. Like the only hailstone, or
in the state of
like
Kansas.
Some street youths
a really
playing baseball.
I don't know, a really big bird. I don't know, but it could have happened anytime between 6 o'clock and 2 a.m. And so I'm like, I've come to an acceptance of this, you know. I'm not even upset. This is just the way it is. So I drove back home. Also very loud. The highway's a loud place. And so I've been experiencing this like weird auditory illusion because it sounds like everything's behind you. Because it's the rear window. It's the rear driver's side window. And so I was like waiting on a train earlier. Train's in front of me. Sounds behind me.
Ooh.
So I taped a trash bag over it. And I'm going to try to get it fixed tomorrow.
Nice.
That's my story.
What a way to start the week.
Right?
Classic.
Just another stop on this journey of interesting car things that it's been happening for about 1.5 years.
We could probably do a whole podcast episode on everything that's happened to you car related.
Oh, we definitely could. It would just be like an unrelated episode.
And by that time, we're going to have like some serious cult followers that get legitimately ticked off that we didn't stick to movies. Like, dang it! I'm done with these guys.
They've sold out. Speaking of movies, segue. Today, we're talking about Duck Soup, the 1933 Marx Brothers classic.
So whenever he said Duck Soup, most of you were probably like, what? And then he said, that 1930-something Marx Brothers classic. And then you still said, what?
That's the idea.
Yeah.
You know, to bring attention to these movies that most people haven't seen.
Oh. This is a learning process.
He hasn't read the mission statement.
We don't have a mission statement.
Does anybody want to give a synopsis of this movie? I have a quote from Roger Ebert's review. To describe the plot would be an exercise in futility.
I mean, I'll give it a go.
All right,
You wanna try it?
give it a go.
All right, I'll give it a go. So, there's this country, Fredonia, and their esteemed leader has just died. And his widow is very rich, and she's going to donate a lot of money to this country. That way it doesn't go out of, like, it doesn't fall
Go out of business.
Yeah, it doesn't go out of business. But that way it doesn't, like, fall into bankruptcy. As long as Rufus T. Firefly is put into the position of power. And, of course, Firefly is played by Groucho Marx. Well, there's this other character of a neighboring company. He's a
neighboring company.
You capitalist pig.
I mean, that's basically what this movie is saying.
Uh-huh.
We can talk about that in themes. Anyways, they this neighboring country sends their ambassador over, and they get into a disagreement, and they start a war over it, and then the war ends very shortly.
Yeah, it's like a 10-minute war.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
And the war starts because Firefly slaps a guy in the face, pretty much.
With his gloves.
With his glove,
his
yeah.
gloves.
In true Victorian fashion.
Mm-hmm. So
that's good. That's a good summary.
I mean, that's pretty much as specific as you can get, because anything else that happens really doesn't have to do with the plot.
Yeah,
Oh, no.
it's one of those movies that like every line is a joke, and
Every scene is a skit that's strung together to a movie.
yeah, pretty much lots of puns from Groucho. Really, it's like Airplane. It's like pre-Airplane.
Yeah. Which isn't to say that I disliked it, because I really enjoyed watching it.
No,
But-
it's really enjoyable.
Yeah.
Just very very anarchical,
Yeah.
if that's a word.
Yes, there's not a lot of coherence to it. Any discernible patterns, I think, just throw those out the window.
Yeah, like I watched it again this afternoon, so I watched it twice. But when Ciccolini and Pinky, the two spies, are in Trentino's office, like reporting to him, there's a part where Pinky, who's played by Harpo, so he's like the visual humor guy. He never speaks.
Yeah.
And he has this cigar stub, and he like flips it up with a ruler and whacks it, and then he runs to one side of the room and runs to the other and just like slides, and then Chico's just like, "You're out!" And then they just go back to the scene that they were doing. So kind of the whole movie's like that.
Well, the thing about Pinky is that, like, he never stops just picking on people.
Yeah.
Like, he's cutting the things that they're using. Like, there's scenes where people are writing with, like, a big, long feather pen, and he just takes out some scissors that he just keeps in his belt all the time. And he just takes and, like, cuts that in half.
And
or
they're,
takes
like,
people's
giant
cigars,
scissors, which is great.
cigars and cuts them in half. And,
Or
like,
their tails off of their suit coats.
and, like, I just, as while I'm watching, like, I'm enjoying this, but at the same time, like, I'm kind of tense because I'm like, this dude's the most annoying person I can think of. Like, it created that feeling in me of not being able to avoid someone you really don't like.
Yeah, it was pretty great.
All right, so let's get into some of our favorite moments. Tanner, what's a moment you want to talk about?
Well, I think the first moment that, because you start watching it and the opening scene, there's like this gala where they're introducing Groucho Marx as the new leader of the country, and this guy comes over, and all of a sudden he just starts singing, and I watched it with Austin, and we were both just kind of like, is this a musical? Like, they just start singing this song, and we're like, all right, this is cool. But the first, like, through that whole thing, it's just kind of Groucho Marx riffing and punning and making jokes about people, both in song form and in, like, talking.
I don't remember a moment when he says just a normal line that's not a pun.
That's
Like,
yeah.
everything he says is somehow a joke
Or
fun.
sets up a joke
Right.
that happens. But anyway, my favorite first moment is when the ambassador to the other country they're trying to annex Fredonia. He opens the door because he's talking about these 2 spies that are the best spies that he knows. And he opens the door, and there's these 2 people standing there, and they're in masks. And one guy takes off his mask, and it's Ciccolini. And then he grabs the other guy by the shoulders and turns him around, and it's the face of Pinky. And it's like, I was not expecting that at all, because it's like, oh, they're revealing the character's true face. But one guy pulls it off, he spins the other guy around, so the mask is like on the back of his head with a giant beard, so you can't tell that it's the back of him.
And like the glasses with like the spiral eyes that are just like spinning around.
So at that was the point where I was like, no matter what happens for the rest of this movie, it's going to be one of the best movies ever. And it is. I was correct in that assumption.
I think a moment, not exactly like that, but really the first joke in the movie, the setup, like the first scene when Mrs. Teasdale is like, the leader has to be Rufus T. Firefly. There's not really a lot of jokes in that part. And then Groucho shows up, and kind of the first joke he makes is he goes, take a card. And she was like, all right, what do I do with it? And he's like, you can keep it. I have 51 more. And I was just like, oh. That's how it's going to be.
see that first kind of, joke to me was whenever, I think it was the secretary of Firefly, he said something along the lines of, in all my years working for Mr. Firefly, he's never been late. And so they start singing this grand song, and the soldiers start lining up in the entrance.
And they pull out their swords.
They pull out their swords, and they're making this tunnel. And then they sing, what is it, I think it's some song about His Excellency, whatever.
It's like, Hail, Hail Fredonia.
Hail Fredonia, he has arrived. And then they finish, and nobody. You're expecting him to walk through, and there's just no one there. And then they start re-singing it again, like it's expected him to come through. And I was like, okay, I didn't expect this movie to be that funny. Like, you think about it, it's like, this is an old movie from a time that's a long time ago from what we live now. And I was like, well, I don't know how much I'm going to enjoy this movie.
Yeah.
But it surprised me a lot.
Right during that scene, this will be my moment. We're not speaking in a very structured way right now, which is kind of appropriate.
Yeah.
But when he doesn't show up, and then it cuts to him, and his alarm clock goes off because he's in bed, and he like jumps up, and he takes his nightgown off, and he's got a suit on underneath it, and then he goes over, and there's just a fireman's pole right there. Slides down the fireman's pole just into the gallery where they are.
But he doesn't walk through the tunnel. He shows up like from the side, and so he sees all the people standing there, and he pulls out like a feather or like
no, it's a cigar.
It's a cigar.
Oh, it's a cigar
because he was in bed with a cigar
right.
in his mouth.
And he just holds a cigar, like standing there, and everyone's just kind of like, "Oh, there he is." Like, welcome, thank you for coming.
He stands there with the soldiers, and he's talking with one of the soldiers beside him, and he goes, who are we waiting for? Is he here yet?
Oh, man.
All right, Dan, what's a moment you have?
Oh, man. I think probably what I thought was one of the most unique, and it reminded me of other things, was it was right after that gala scene, that ball, wherever you introduce Firefly, and he has to go to some other place, like the Hall of Representatives or something like that.
Yeah.
And he goes, fetch me my car. And then one of the guards yells, His Excellency's car. And then it cuts to like 3 soldiers standing in a row going, His Excellency's car. And then these guys out by the gate, His Excellency's car. And then like this motorcycle and buggy just come sidecar just come through, and there's obviously the anticlimaticism of it being just that motorcycle and buggy was pretty funny, but also like the repeating of the yelling His Excellency's car reminded me,
and they play like a fanfare between each.
Yeah. It reminded me of like stuff from like Monty Python a lot, like Holy Grail, and I can't think exactly what it is, but kind of those repeated things, like maybe like the it's like bring me a shrubbery, and then it plays that scary music afterwards, you know, with Monty Python. So,
or like when they're reading the directions for the holy bomb or whatever it is.
Well, if we ever do anything on that, that's my favorite moment. So spoiler alert, guys, that's my favorite moment in the whole movie. The holy hand grenade, yeah.
The holy hand grenade, yeah.
But it also reminded me of like a lot of stuff in this movie reminded me of stuff that I think like Seth MacFarlane has definitely seen this movie, and Seth MacFarlane is the guy who wrote Family Guy and stuff like that. So I think a lot of that humor is the same as I think he got that from this movie and the Marx Brothers and things like that. So really short. It wasn't even like a moment. It was just like 5 seconds. But that's probably one of the points where I got hooked into this movie.
All right, Austin, you have a favorite moment?
Yeah, so we touched on it earlier a little bit, but it's the first kind of sight gag sequence in the film when the two spies are kind of reporting to Tarantino. Trentino, thank you. There's an R there.
Now, there's the mashup of the century. Marx Brothers meets Tarantino.
Oh, man.
His Excellency's car! Blood everywhere.
So in that sequence, it's just like from the start after that moment where they're introduced in the doorway and he like, you know, flips him around and like turns out it was the back of his head or whatever. It's just like nonstop action, like one sight gag after the other. It's like, honestly, if I watched it again, I could probably just like find like 3 new ones that I didn't even notice because they're just like right after the other. What's just kind of also interesting within that, half of them are like these things that like spies do, like answering the phone, making sure it's like nobody, you know, that's you know, no harm's gonna come to Trentino.
Yes.
Okay, got it that time. And just like the fluidity of all of it is just really entertaining, I think.
Yeah,
so
I think
it caught my attention at the very beginning of the film.
One of my favorite jokes from that scene is when Trentino says, "No, you were supposed to get his records." And Pinky pulls out a vinyl record, and Trentino gets angry. He throws it up in the air, and Pinky pulls out a revolver and like skeet shoots it.
Yeah, so it's just like right after the other, and then, like at the end, they're like doing all these things to Trentino that like he doesn't even notice, and then by the end they leave, and I don't think we even see that he like notices like that his coat tail has been cut and like tar's been put on his butt and like feathers and like or whatever. It's just quite entertaining and quite fluid.
And see, for me, my favorite kind of that sequence was whenever they were messing with that lemonade vendor, and they just constantly kept on switching hats because eventually, like, first they're just like taking the lemonade vendor's hat and kind of passing it back and forth and doing stuff with it and setting it on fire and doing stuff like that. But then eventually, all 3 of their hats get into it, and so they each keep trying to like take hats, but every combination isn't right. And man, that one goes on forever. That's the thing. That one was like a slow like descendance into laughing for me because I was like, oh, this is kind of entertaining. Oh wait, oh my gosh, this is genius.
Tanner, what's another moment that you liked?
Oh, well, the moment that was also one of my favorites was when Pinky and Ciccolini are talking with Firefly. They go into Firefly's office, and that whole scene, because it starts off with a phone call that Pinky answers, and he's like, you can see it on his face, but what happens is he like opens up his jacket, and stuck into his belt are lots of different horns, and so it'll be like, oh, but it'll like squeeze the horn and be like, it'll just be like, oh, and it's like like he's talking to this person on the phone using these horns, which is hilarious. And then he's standing there, and Firefly's like, who are you? And he gets all excited, and he pulls up his sleeve, and it's just a picture of him like that he has tattooed on his arm. He's like, oh, that's pretty neat. Got any others? And he pulls up his other sleeve, and it's a lady in a bikini, and he starts
he says, I don't go in much for modern art. Do you have any of the old masters?
Yeah. And so he pulls up his other sleeve, and it's a lady in a bikini, and he starts flexing his fingers so that she like starts to wiggle, and he's like, oh, you have her phone number? And he pulls up his shirt, and like on his hip he has a number, and so he writes down the number, and then he's like, where are you from? And he opens up the front of his shirt, and it's a doghouse. And he's like, oh, it doesn't look like much, but it's home. And then it zooms in real close, and a dog pokes his head out, and it's just like, roar, but it's like a real actual dog. And I think I watched that in the movie, and I was like, wait, what?
Yeah,
and then I've watched that scene like 3 or 4 times. Like, how did they do that? Because it looks pretty real. But yeah, it was. I mean,
but I'm not going
compositing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, obviously I know how they do it, but it was like for the 30s.
They put a real dog in his
chest.
a miniature dog.
Oh, wow!
And
The
they made
30s,
it, like break out like
time.
alien style.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the original chest burster scene.
But yeah, that scene was also one of my favorite scenes.
And then he says, "You know what? I bet you haven't got a picture of my grandfather." And he like starts to like turns around. He's like, he's gonna moon him.
Yeah,
And he's like, maybe at a different time. So no discussion of Duck Soup would be complete without mentioning the mirror sequence.
Yes.
So I don't think I can even explain the setup because it's too complicated.
Yeah.
But basically, there's a really big mirror in one of the hallways, and one of the guys runs into it, and it breaks. And at this point, Rufus T. Firefly, he's like in his nightgown and his nightcap, and the two spies, Ciccolini and Pinky, for whatever reason, are dressed the exact same way. And so Pinky, I think, ends up on the other side of that now an open doorway where the mirror was.
Mm-hmm.
And he and Firefly walk out at the same time. And so Pinky like has to fool him into thinking that it's like his reflection. So it's just this sequence that goes on and on and on of them like imitating each other exactly.
I think my favorite part of that scene is when the one of them spins around and the other one doesn't spin, but then he just like lands in the same pose that the guy that spins is in.
Yeah,
That part's probably my favorite.
Yeah, an interesting little backstory to this is this part was actually specifically contributed by the director, Leo McCarey. And the thing is, this was actually taken from a Charlie Chaplin film called The Floor Walker, this specific kind of setup. So, a little bit of, if you want to see this again in earlier years, about 20 years earlier, you can watch that film and see kind of maybe the original inspiration for it.
Yeah, and I think it's just so skillfully done.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it's not just, it's the way that they keep doing new things that are different and funny every time. Like, Firefly goes on the other side of the wall and he's like, oh, I know what I'm going to do. And he pulls out this hat. And he's like holding it behind his back. And the other, it's like this straw hat. And the other guy, you see, he's got a top hat behind. And so then they stand there and they face each other. And Firefly whips out his hat. And then Pinky whips out his hat as well. But he had a straw hat in the other hand. And it's like, whoops, psych. Can't fool me.
And well, what's interesting too is the fact that they actually did all that in one morning. Like they shot the whole thing in one morning, comparative to it's just very efficient.
Yeah.
As well.
Well, the Marx Brothers did have their start in like vaudeville, so like a lot of their acts they just took from vaudeville that they had practiced as a family group and just put them on film. So they had them all down pretty well already. So that's probably why they were able to get them done so fast.
Yeah.
Whenever this was what we've been talking about so far is more of like the physical jokes.
Yeah.
Right. But this one was one that could kind of just really just go right over your head if you're not paying attention. It's whenever the two spies are giving their report to the ambassador from the rival nation. So they're supposed to be tailing Firefly. They're supposed to be following him. And so they come to report, and Chico says something to the tune of, well, Wednesday we went to the ball game, and he fooled us because he didn't show up. and then Wednesday he went to the ball game. We fool him. We don't show up.
Thursday was a doubleheader. No one showed up.
Yeah, and like that one, I actually rewound. I rewound the take and went and listened to it again because I thought that was so clever. But it could just go by you so quickly. Yeah, I don't have much else to say about that. But other than, I mean, it's just good stuff. It's just, in case you haven't gotten it yet, this is good stuff.
Yeah, I think we all really enjoyed this movie.
And it doesn't matter, like, if you watch the movie, like, with your full attention, you're gonna miss something, because the jokes go so fast. Yeah, it definitely, you need to watch it more than once.
I think one interesting thing to note that I found really entertaining in the kind of final war scenes is that every time they kind of go to a different like part of the war, it's like in a different era, and like throughout the whole thing, I'm not sure if they cover all of them. I know the hat that Groucho Firefly wears. He wears a hat from every era of like all the wars that America fought in. I don't know if like the rest of the surroundings are like with that as well, but
they're trapped in the same house.
Yeah, well it's the thing. It's like it like switches every time, and it's usually just like the costumes that they're wearing. Can't say much about the surrounding set, but it's just like a subtle thing that just changes, and like, you know, if you're not really paying attention, you could kind of go over your head pretty quick.
Yeah, I 100% missed that the first time.
Yeah.
And then I read about that scene, so then I was watching, and it's like, you know, it's Revolutionary War, and then it's like Civil War, and it's like, okay, that's pretty funny. And then at one point, he's just in a Davy Crockett outfit, and he's got his coonskin cap, and then Pinky snips the tail off the cap with his scissors. I think we should touch on when there's the declaration of war. And they do a big musical number.
That was just the strangest, but also the best moment.
The first time I watched it, I was just like, what is happening? And then when I watched it today, I was like cracking up the whole time because it's like this kind of big, grandiose sort of, we're going to war kind of song. And then all four of the brothers who are in this movie, because there's 5 of them, but one of them wasn't in a lot of the movies. This is the only musical number that features all 4 of them in any of their movies. Yeah. And there's a point where they're all together in front in a row, and then they start like, they're just like singing nonsense words. They're like, so Heidi, 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 ho, and they're like going up and down, and then everyone else in the room sings the same thing, and it's just this like bizarre verse of Follow the Leader, and then they go into this, I want to say sort of like spiritual, if you know what genre that is, and they're just like, all God's children got guns, and I was just like, and then they all pull out banjos, and I think that was my favorite part just because of the voices they're doing. They're just like, oh, free, don't ya? Oh, don't you cry for me.
You know, I bet
5 different genres in one song.
Yeah,
I bet if you go online, you can find that dance scene just by itself, and I would highly suggest.
Yeah,
I mean, I'd highly suggest watching the whole movie.
The whole thing, yeah. But I mean,
if you need to be convinced,
yeah. I think my favorite part of that dancing scene was a part where they didn't even do any discernible dance moves. People are just like on their knees, like flailing around, kind of in like a
just rolling on the ground.
I guess the best way to say is like those tall, lanky, inflatable things outside of car dealerships.
The wacky waving inflatable arm man.
Yes, that's pretty much what they were like, and all of them were doing that at the same time, and I was just like, this is like the weirdest cult I've ever seen in my life.
All right, so I want to say my favorite joke from the whole movie, and then we can go into research. It's from Ciccolini's trial scene when Firefly's he's sort of monologuing again, and he says, "I say we give him 10 years in Leavenworth, or 11 years in 12 worth." And I don't know if it's just because like I've been to Leavenworth a few times. I don't know, and that one just got me.
Leavenworth, the town. Not Leavenworth, the prison.
Yeah, I've never been arrested there. I've driven past the prison. All right. So, shall we go into research?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We've arrived.
I can tell you where the title comes from.
Tell us where the title comes from.
So, they asked Groucho Marx what the title came from, and he said, "Take 2 turkeys, 1 goose, 4 cabbages, but no duck, and mix them together. After one taste, you'll have duck soup for the rest of your life." And so that's why they named it duck soup. That's not why, but that was a reason why he said it was. The film's title is actually a familiar American phrase at that time, and it meant that it was like that you were a simple person, or that you were gullible, or like just a pushover.
I think it also meant something that was. It would be like if you say piece of cake today.
Yeah.
So it could also mean that.
Yeah, I know. Duck soup, piece of cake.
We should bring it back.
We should.
All right.
I'm in.
You heard it here first. The new old phrase is duck soup. All the hipsters are using it. Most of what I read was this was kind of a critical and commercial failure at the time. And here's a quote that I apologize. I didn't say what article it was from. So, but audiences were taken aback by such preposterous political disrespect, buffoonery, and cynicism at a time of political and economic crisis with Roosevelt's struggle against depression in the U.S. amidst the rising power of Hitler in Germany. So, from what I got, it's really a foreign concept today, but people like wanted to believe in their government because it was the Depression, and so they were looking to believe in their government to help them. And this was 1933, so it had been almost 2 decades since World War I, but I'm sure that was still
pretty fresh
in the memory, and particularly Firefly's line, "And remember, while you're out there risking life and limb through shot and shell, we'll be in here thinking what a sucker you are." And then, I don't know, I guess it was just too soon for some people. They saw it as insensitive. But then one article I read said, "This totally sums up people's attitudes toward government at the time." So basically the opposite.
Yeah.
Because people were unhappy with Hoover's management. Herbert Hoover's management of the Depression.
And that quote is from filmsite.org that Zach mentioned earlier.
Thank you. And thank you to filmsite.org.
He was not sponsoring this, unfortunately.
Not a sponsor.
But, I mean, if they're listening and they want to, like, you can.
Yeah, you can
Cool with us.
you can contact us on Twitter at DogInTheWoods50.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I read a quote, and there were, like, in an interview today, someone asked Groucho what the political significance was, and he said, "What significance? We were just four Jews trying to get a laugh." So he was just like, we're just making jokes. They weren't trying to say anything profound.
Yeah. Which, is interesting because when I was when we were writing the running joke, one of the things that I initially was saying was everything has to like have a point because it's satire. Like every joke has to have some corollary, like some point to it. And they're like, everything's a joke, everything's a pun. You know, it's a political satire still, but it's not super pointed. I think that was just sort of the backdrop they chose for the jokes they wanted to make.
I mean, I think I would say the one consistency that's throughout the entire movie is kind of this flippancy towards war on the part of the government, right? Because the whole reason they're fighting is because a guy got slapped in the face with a glove.
And the reason he got slapped in the face with the glove is because he called the other guy an upstart.
Yeah. And so at the same time, there is the line like we mentioned before with, we're sending you to war and we're back here laughing and thinking you suckers. Whatever. But I think it's always interesting to see, the comments of the people involved with a movie and saying, well, this isn't what we're saying. But then at the same time, you can see these kind of, okay, nothing's really clear in Duck Soup, but these somewhat patterned critiques of certain things.
an interesting point, which I can't remember. I think this is when initially was released in Fredonia, New York. Their mayor was upset because it was getting a bad rep.
Yeah, I read this.
The Marx Brothers were like, just change the name of the town.
Yeah, change the name of your town. It's hurting our picture.
Yeah.
But then they did add an extra E into Fredonia in the movie.
Because it's free.
Yeah,
exactly.
Fredonia.
Yeah.
Close enough to Fredonia.
In spite of all the rules of his new administration.
Yeah.
I think really the critique is just sort of in a general sense.
General sense?
General sense. We just saluted. You couldn't see it, but we did. You know, obviously I don't know that much about, you know, the American government of the 1930s, so I couldn't speak to any specific jokes. But it's just like in the cabinet meeting when the guy's like, we should take up the tax, and Firefly's like, we should take up the carpet. And he's just always making comments like that, and just like firing people for no reason, and hiring the peanut vendor who was on the street, and just his whole
as the Secretary of War, no less.
Yeah, it's just this whole.
What kind of army should we have? We should have a standing army. Oh, why is that? Because then we can save money on chairs.
Yeah, just this whole flippancy and incompetence as a ruler, which that made me think of one of my favorite jokes that I forgot to mention when during the war scene when one of the like generals or whoever comes in and he says, we'll have to dig trenches, and he says, all right, do it. Wait a minute, dig them this deep, and he holds his hand up to his neck. He says, dig them this deep and our soldiers won't have to wear pants. And he says, no, wait a minute, dig them this deep, and he holds up his hand over his head. He's like, dig them this deep and we won't need soldiers.
Another interesting note, Margaret Dumont, who played Mrs. Gloria Teasdale, she supposedly never understood any of the Marx Brothers jokes on screen or off screen. Which is great because her character, you know, doesn't laugh at anything. She's like the kind of the straight man of the whole show.
Or the straight woman, if we're gonna, you know.
Yeah, sorry, my bad. Apologize.
Yeah, especially since she's the butt of a lot of the jokes.
Right.
Yeah, like when he says something about that covers a lot of ground. Say, you cover a lot of ground. You should get out of here. I hear they're gonna take you down and put it in an office building where you're standing. Or like, I can just picture us in our new home and you're bending over the stove, but I can't see the stove.
There's a lot. He switches between just making fun of her and flirting with her so that he can get all of her money. Yeah, it's a pretty funny dynamic.
Anything else as to the themes? It's not a particularly deep movie.
No, not so much.
I feel like we touched on the governmental kind of side of things and war side of things.
And even that could be stretching.
Yeah, that's
right,
pretty much it.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any criticisms? I wrote down this section on the marker board. We have a marker board to reference, just so you know. A little inside behind the scenes info for you. But I wrote this down and I said, I'm writing this, but basically this is the perfect movie. So.
The reason that we chose it is because it was on the American Film Institute's top 100 movies. Do you remember what number it was? Was it?
I think it was 60.
60?
Yeah, 60.
Okay, yeah. That's what I was thinking too. Which, I mean, I can't say that I've seen a lot of the movies in the top 59, but I'm surprised it's not higher just because I feel like this movie definitely influenced a lot of comedies, at least from the 80s. Like, any spoof movie definitely can be seen in this movie, like from the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing that I found a little bit, and it's interesting because I mean this kind of shows more opinions in a certain way, but the lemonade vendor scene with the hats, I found it to be humorous, but it just felt kind of long after a while and repetitive in terms of things, and I felt like it kind of just dragged on and kind of broke the flow.